Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this co-badged lunchtime event organised by the SecEd Young Members Committee in collaboration with the ICE London Graduates and the Students Committee. So we're very pleased to have Dr. Harriette Stone with us today from the FCDO, who's kindly agreed to give us a talk on delivering resilient infrastructure. Before I do an introduction for our speaker, I'll just quickly go through some housekeeping rules. So please can all guests attending the event keep your videos and microphones on mute during the seminar. We're going to have a Q&A session after the presentation, but please feel free to put your questions in the chat pane at any time. And please note that the seminar will be recorded and then it will be uploaded to the SecEd YouTube channel. So by dialing into the event, you're consenting to any views or opinions you share being made public. Great, so moving on to the event itself, like I said, in this seminar, we have Harriette, who will give us a presentation about the UK Caribbean Infrastructure Fund, which concerns the delivery of 15 infrastructure projects in the Caribbean, I think. So that's great. So Dr. Harriette Stone is a team leader and senior infrastructure advisor in the UK government's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. She is currently responsible for the delivery of the £350 million UK Caribbean Infrastructure Funds, which is building major economic infrastructure in a resilient and socially inclusive way in 9 Caribbean countries. She has previously worked at DFID, Cabinet Office, the World Bank and Arab. She completed her doctorate at UCL under the supervision of Dina de Ayala, developing and testing methods for improving seismic exposure and vulnerability models. She is also a chartered civil engineer. Perfect. So I think it's fair to say we're all very curious to hear about the work that has been undertaken by the FCDO. So without any further delay, Harriette, can I hand over to you?
Thanks very much, Chris, and thank you for the introduction. Let me just see if I can pull my slides up. If I can steal the screen from you. And maybe if you can give me a nod once you can see them.
That's coming through, thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, well, good morning from Barbados. I think it's afternoon probably where most of you are in the UK. Yes, and I think I wanted to just start with a bit of a disclaimer. So I had to postpone the last session, and apologies for that, because I had a bad dose of COVID. Today I have tonsillitis and some other kind of virus that isn't COVID, but I really didn't want to delay again. So bear with me, bear with my voice if it cracks up a little bit. I've got my trusty cup of tea ready to help me through if needed. But yes, anyway, we'll soldier on, and I look forward to this discussion. I'll talk through a couple of things. Already with the coughing, sorry. I'll talk through a couple of things I've been working on. I'll give you a bit of my background, and then we can have some questions and answers at the end. Hopefully that works for everybody. So yes, as Chris said, I'm Dr. Harriette Stone, a team leader and senior infrastructure advisor at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Formerly was Department for International Development, but merged under Boris Johnson's government. And I'm based in the Caribbean, currently living in Barbados, which, you know, someone has to do it. It's a tough life. So I think I've been asked to give us probably a slightly different talk to the usual kind of technical, geeky engineering talks that I used to enjoy when I turned up to SecEd and ICE talks. Instead, I think I'm going to give you a kind of talk that I would have wanted to hear a few years ago when I really wanted to get into this space, into international development, working in, you know, infrastructure and international development. So hopefully this presentation and the discussion afterwards will whet your appetite and for work in this kind of area and show the incredible difference that people like us as engineers can make in the world. We all know resilient infrastructure is really important, from not only from climate aspects, but also from disaster aspects, things like, geophysical hazards and other things. And technically, we have the tools and the ability to design and build resilient infrastructure. But how does it actually work? How do you do this kind of thing in developing countries? Let's dive in and see. I also wanted to start, I think, with, why are you here? Are you interested in working abroad? Are you interested in what the UK does and contributes in developing countries? Do you want to live in the Caribbean? I definitely am enjoying that privilege. Are you interested in, the question I just posed, how we actually can build resilient infrastructure in low and middle income countries? We know it's so vital, but how can we actually do it? Are we just trying to tick off some CPD hours? I definitely hear you on that one as well. So yeah, as I said, I'll talk a bit about my career paths so far, and then I'll go into what the UK Caribbean infrastructure is, what it does, where we work, why, how we do it, with whom, and also, is it hard or is it easy? What are the challenges? So I'll start with me. I had a bit of a moment when I was about to graduate from my undergraduate in civil engineering, and thought suddenly, oh my gosh, what am I going to do in this world? Moment of sheer panic. What's going to happen? What are you going to do with your life? And at that moment, I decided that I wanted to do as much positive as I could in the world. Now, that's a lofty goal, right? And I was young and naive, so you have to forgive me for having this lofty goal. But it really has set the foundations for the decisions that I've made as I've kind of navigated my career journey. I started obviously very quickly to look into international development, but what I saw was well-intentioned engineers going into developing country contexts without the required experience or skills to really be able to help that country in a safe and in the best way. And I really struggled with that. I think I fundamentally didn't agree with that kind of approach. And what that meant to me was that I wanted to make sure that I was the best engineer that I could be before I then went to go and try and work in these countries. To me, if I wasn't trusted to be an engineer on my own in the UK, I needed to have people checking my designs and checking my work, then why should I be let loose in Africa or Southeast Asia or in really poor communities that needed the same level engineering, that the same level of protection and safety as people in the UK? So perhaps that meant until I was chartered, perhaps that meant until I'd had a few years under my belt. But anyway, that's how I started my career. So I, as Chris mentions, I started at Harriette, and I absolutely loved it there. Built a obviously brilliant, solid technical base. I also worked at Balfour Beatty, so I got a bit of the contractor side as well, how we actually build things, how you actually put things together. And I worked towards my chartership, my ICE chartered status, and went from there. So with that box ticked, so once I passed my chartership, I felt free, I think, to move to stage 2 of my plan, and start to look at how I could work internationally and in developing countries, and bring the skills and the knowledge of kind of UK engineers, or let's say developed country engineers, into these more difficult contexts, or contexts where those skills don't necessarily exist as much. So I went to go and pursue a doctorate at UCL under the guidance of Professor Dina Dayala, who I believe is the best, and I loved working for her. And I was extremely lucky that the program I was on was linked with the World Bank as well. So I exploited that opportunity as much as I can. I worked on some incredible projects, learned from some incredible colleagues, and managed to do some research that I just loved every single day of. And I'll go into my research a little bit more, just to kind of make sure that the SecEd folks are happy that I've at least talked about earthquakes and structural dynamics a little bit in this talk. And I think just to kind of finish this journey on my career, I think when my doctorate was drawing to a close, I had a lot of options open to me. I could go back to being, you know, a consulting engineer, which I loved. I could go and continue work at the World Bank. But another opportunity that opened up was working for a donor, an international development donor, where you have the ability to design the programs where a lot of money is spent. You can choose and advise on where you can build infrastructure and what the best way to do that is, and how to do it in the best ways, and who the communities it will serve, and the kinds of scales that you can do that. And I didn't understand much about that area of the international development puzzle, so I was really intrigued. So I went from my PhD and I joined DFID, Department for International Development, which doesn't actually exist anymore. It's been merged now, but it was DFID back then. And so that's basically where I am now. And I'll go obviously into what my role is now in the UK Caribbean Infrastructure Fund. But I just quickly, as I said, wanted to just dip my toes back into the research that I used to do, just so that you can have an idea of kind of where I've come from and what my interests are. So this is the front page of my thesis, which obviously I'm extremely proud of. And obviously I could talk about the research that I did for my PhD and out kind of on the sides of my PhD for, you know, I could do whole other talks on that, and I have done other talks on that. But in a nutshell, my research when I was at UCL focused on the problem of trying to improve the accuracy and cost efficiency of seismic risk assessments. To do that, I tackled the problem of trying to understand what the most important data on exposure and vulnerability was needed and needed to be collected. You know, do we need to know how tall a building is over whether it's got kind of structural deficiencies, or how old it is, or trying to work out what the most important characteristics were to be collected, because we don't have all data, and data costs money to collect. So trying to work out what the optimum balance of, you know, what data, how much data, etc. And then trialing collecting those data using new technology for the first time. So things like drones, flying them around cities, taking aerial shots, but also building 3D models of cities so that we can look and see the characteristics of the different buildings and do seismic vulnerability assessments from those data. Also using omnidirectional cameras, which is basically a camera that takes a 360-degree photo. So, you know, when you use Google Street View, those are omnidirectional images. And so in the developing world, you know, there isn't always a Google Street View image of the street. So, you know, I wanted to understand, well, Google will soon take over the world and have done every street, I'm sure. But, you know, could we use that kind of imagery to better collect data for seismic vulnerability assessment? Is it going to be accurate enough? Is it going to be good enough? So I tested these two different technologies for the first time in this kind of seismic engineering space, to try and see what could collect the right data most accurately and most cost effectively, let's say. I also used those two kind of new bits of technology to, in a post-earthquake situation as well. You can only imagine how great it is to see, you know, on Google Street View, the old street with all the buildings intact, and then the images that I've taken with an omnidirectional camera with the changed state after an earthquake. You can have teams of people in a virtual space anywhere in the world analysing that and saying, right, there's damage on this street, there's a lot of damage here, this building looks really badly damaged. And that will help crews who are trying to, you know, search and rescue, or trying to kind of work out how they're going to, you know, rebuild a city, help them spot the places that they need to prioritise and put their efforts into. So I was really interested in doing that. And obviously I took drones there as well, so you could then have a 3D image of cities. So there's lots of really cool opportunities. And basically what I did for 4 years was like travel around Latin America, playing with really cool toys, really cool gadgets, and trying to improve, you know, how we plan for and how we respond to earthquakes, which you know, was I really loved it. And yes, anyway, but I'm not going to get into the detail because that's not what this talk is about. But just show you a couple of images. So this is the camera you can see kind of attached to the truck, the back of the cabin of the truck, and this is me driving around Guatemala City taking images that you know, Google hadn't been to Guatemala City, and it's very vulnerable to earthquakes. So we were the first to do this. There's been over 5 million views of the images that we took. So people are obviously wanting to see this kind of data, probably not for this purpose, but yeah, so there's a picture of that. This is standing on the top of a tall building. I can't remember how tall it is, but this is the drone about to take off, and us flying the drone around, capturing aerial images that will turn into something like this. So this is a 3D model that you can navigate around, but you can see the streets. Obviously, it's not perfect, and since I did this, probably things like this have improved, but you can start to see that you actually have a really good viewpoint of a city. If you're trying to understand how vulnerable or what buildings look like, you get a lot more data than just walking down the street or from just a satellite image. So lots of different opportunities. This is another one of a zone in Guatemala City that has some more high-rise buildings. But yeah, there we go. So that was the research that I did in the kind of earthquake space. And I'll just, I think, change chapter and start talking about the UK Caribbean Infrastructure Fund, which is my job now. Obviously, the Caribbean is susceptible to earthquakes. We all know that. There's a huge hurricane risk here as well, and there's a huge deficit of infrastructure. So let me just walk you through kind of the things that, just in case you don't know and you haven't kind of worked or studied in the Caribbean, you know, there are volcanoes here. They struggle with so much. There are volcanoes, there's drought, there's flooding, there's coastal erosion, earthquakes, as I've mentioned, sea level rise, you know, extreme heat, hurricanes I've mentioned, and, you know, all landslides, everything really that you can have as a disaster they face here. But they also, as these small island nations, they really struggle to manage that, but also provide the public services that they need to provide to their citizens and to keep their economies going. They have these frequent disasters which constantly sets their economy, you know, back. They have disproportionate needs. So, you know, I always use the example of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a country about the population of about Winchester or Carlisle, and they have 5 airports that they need to build, maintain, run, operate, all of that, which is, you know, extortionate. It's a disproportionate need. They have, you know, they have to provide these services for all the different people that live on the different islands, but it's disproportionate and expensive. A lot of these islands obviously attract tourists, and that's a big part of their economy. But tourists demand good roads, and they demand water networks that don't switch off, and they demand power networks that, you know, give them constant power. And so it's not only, you know, expensive and difficult and disproportionate, but they have to provide, these governments have to provide a top level quality of infrastructure provision. And anyone who's traveled to the Caribbean will know most of the islands are very hilly, they're volcanic and they're very hilly, and often there's only one route from A to B, and it's often around the side of a big hill. So there's constrained spaces. It's difficult to find good routes for roads and good routes for power cables because you only have one way and it's around the side of a steep cliff. So, you know, not only is it that constrained space, but there's a lack of redundancy in the network, which is a huge resilience issue. You know, if one road closes, if there is another way around, which sometimes there isn't, there's huge diversions that these people need to take. It's not like you can just pull off the motorway and kind of jump off at the next exit or the exit earlier. It's 2-hour round trips just to get, you know, a 20-minute journey in, which obviously is difficult. And these countries are all, because of these reasons and much more, heavily indebted. So all of this makes for this huge problem that they really have a huge gap in infrastructure. They need some resilient, strong infrastructure to help them, you know, get out of being developing countries and be able to prosper. So recognizing this problem, the UK wanted to try and respond. You know, we have very strong links with the Caribbean for lots of different reasons. But David Cameron back in 2015 really wanted to do something huge and kind of tangible for these countries. So he launched the UK Caribbean Infrastructure Fund in Jamaica in 2015. And he said he wanted to build real tangible things that will make a difference. He wanted to set the foundations for growth, prosperity, and reduce poverty while helping the region become more resilient to the risks of climate change. So again, another lofty goal. So the programme that I manage now was born. It's a £350 million programme, which is a huge amount of money in anybody's terms, even in DFID or FCDO's terms. This is a huge programme, but it shows not only the need in the Caribbean, but it shows the, you know, the UK's commitment to helping this region develop and become, you know, self-sustaining, if you like. The programme timeline is 10 years. Obviously, infrastructure takes a long time to build anyway. Large infrastructure projects, even more so. And in countries where governments are small, capacity is low, they take even longer. So 10 years is, I think, a reasonable amount of time for these kinds of projects in this region. We work through the Caribbean Development Bank. So and I'll talk a bit, I think, in a couple of slides' time, in the next slide, about kind of our relationship and as a donor, where we sit and where the CDB, which I'll call them for now, sit in that. The type of finance, so this is really important because we can give grants, which is just, you know, giving money, or you can give loans in development programs. You can give loans, very concessional, maybe no interest, but you expect the money back. And there are various other different types of finance you can give, but in this instance, there are grants. And the little asterisk there is just to say that, you know, we've allocated an amount of money to each country. They are welcome to add more. They are welcome to take out a loan from a development bank to add to that to make a bigger project happen, or add money from their country budgets. That's absolutely fine. As Chris said at the beginning, there's 15 projects in 8 independent countries in the Caribbean and 1 UK overseas territory. So you can imagine the headache that I have, and you can imagine the air miles that I have traveling around this region, which I'm certainly not going to whinge about because it is a beautiful region to work in. Now, all of that 350 million pays for infrastructure, so the hard infrastructure that we're building, but around that it's really important to pay for the other things. So I talked about the lack of capacity in these governments. They, you know, often these projects that we are helping them do, they're the biggest projects that they've ever done, or they're in the top 3 certainly of the biggest projects that they've ever, as a country, ever undertaken. So there's a capacity problem there that we need to support them in. So there's funding there for them to enhance their project management units, to bring in specialists if they need it, to, you know, have consultants with them supporting them through contract management, or, you know, whatever deficiencies that they feel they have. And that's really, really important. And obviously will leave a legacy where these governments know a bit more about how to run good infrastructure programs. Technical assistance, so TA there, sorry, I tried to take out all of my acronyms and international development jargon, but technical assistance, or TA as we call it, that is all of the other things around the outsides of the infrastructure grants. So an example of TA that we have, and I'll take us through some of the islands where there'll be other examples, but one example is in let's go for St. Vincent. I've already mentioned St. Vincent, where we're building a new port, and currently where the port is, the existing port is, there are people who informally have set up stalls and are selling things. You know, they're just hustling, trying to make a livelihood, trying to live. Now we've had to clear them out because we need those government lands back to build the port, but obviously we don't want them to lose out. We don't want people to be harmed by the work that we're doing or their livelihoods harmed. So we have used TA money to run kind of skills development workshops and employment planning and livelihood kind of development work with them to help them upskill or to help them work out where else they could do that kind of activity. So it's things like that, and those little bits around the outside of the big infrastructure, the big concrete bits, is really, really important in development work. And I've also got evaluation there. So we in international development, we love to reflect on how we do. We're always trying to use money better because there isn't enough money. And so there's an evaluation that's looking at how we're doing this program, how we're delivering it, and the impact that it's having on the ground. And they will give recommendations to the global community on how best to do this kind of thing, given our experience. So that kind of thing is really important to us and FCDO as well. And sorry, I've spent ages on this slide. The focus is, so obviously we want to build this economic infrastructure to enable prosperity and reduce poverty and all of the things that David Cameron said. But we're also really, really interested in increasing climate and disaster resilience and ensuring that the social and gender elements around the projects are incorporated, are fairly included, and the voices of vulnerable groups or people or communities are heard and fed into designs and construction and everything. So moving on, just really quickly mapping out, for those of you who don't know as much about the international development system and how programming is done in this world, you have, this is an example of the UK CIF. So the UK up in the top corner, we're the donor, we provide the funds. The money flows in the direction of this green arrow. So we give our funds to the Caribbean Development Bank. Now they are set up to basically provide assurance that our money is being spent on the things that we want it to be spent on. They have those skill sets. They are set up and have the policies in place and the processes in place to make sure that those things are happening. They have relationships with all of these different governments as well. And so they're a great partner for us to work with. So the CDB then pass the money to governments around the region, these 8 independent governments and the one UK Overseas Territory, for them to be able to then contract with the private sector to get these infrastructure, this infrastructure built, whatever they're building. So that's kind of how it works. And there's obviously like reporting lines coming back. We obviously want to know what's going on and how we can help if there's any more support that we need to give. And we also want to know that the money's being spent on the right things, not the wrong things. So there's kind of a reporting line at the bottom with information flow coming back. So diving into exactly what we're building. So these are the projects. So you can see the spread. And the different types of infrastructure as well, from roads, agricultural developments, and that's irrigation and farm roads and things like that. Ports, there's 2 big ports that we're doing, water and wastewater networks, which are particularly vulnerable in this region, and an energy network, kind of resilience enhancing project in the small island of Barbuda in the north of the Eastern Caribbean. And this is the status of the projects. So 1 is completed, 6 are in construction, 5 are still in procurement. And you can imagine that COVID has slowed a lot of this down and gives me constant headaches, not only in having COVID, but in dealing with the impacts of the pandemic, as I'm sure we all are dealing with. And then 3 are still in design. And there's a lot of stories behind all of this and challenges that I'll dive into towards the end. But let's get into the fun bit, I think. Let's go on a little island hop around the Caribbean, and I'll just talk briefly about some of the different things that we're doing. So I mentioned Barbuda. Barbuda is this beautiful but very flat, small shelf, basically, where about 3,000 people live. It's part of Antigua, so the same country's island. It's a twin island nation. And they were hit by a Category 5 hurricane in 2017, which just flattened the island. Basically, they lost so much, and the damage was just horrific. One of the things that the government wanted us to help with was to improve the resilience of the energy network there. Now, currently, all of the energy network is above ground, and you can imagine that 90% of that was just completely wiped out in this hurricane. So what our project is doing is undergrounding the cables, which isn't easy in coral shelf. It's very hard, but you can see there's a little map here that shows you where we're undergrounding. It's coming from a power station that's been built, a renewable energy plant actually, that's been built up in the top corner, and taking it down to the main town where the vast majority of the population lives. We're then also helping households reconnect back into the grid. So before the hurricane, everyone was connected to the grid and it was fine, even though they didn't really meet the standards that they needed to be connected to the grid. Once they were disconnected during the hurricane, now their wiring isn't to standard enough to reconnect back to the grid, and none of them can afford to get that work done. So part of the project is doing that, and that's kind of speaks to the social and gender elements of the project that are really important, because we can build a resilient energy network, but if the poorest and the most vulnerable families and households can't connect to that network, are we really serving the community well enough? So we've got specialist consultants going around and interviewing households and doing surveys and working out, who needs to be connected, how much that's going to cost, and whatever. But that's all part of the project there. In Barbuda. In Grenada, we're doing two projects, but I'll focus on the Western Coast Road. There's been huge collapses, as I mentioned, these kind of very steep hillsides, frequent landslides, frequent flooding, which causes landslides. And you can see, so the photo here on my left, so I assume your left too, this building, which now appears to be a couple of meters down from the road surface, used to be at road level. So you can see the kind of slippage that we're seeing. And this is one of the major artillery routes for everybody who lives up the west coast of Grenada, which is quite populated, for them to get to the capital, to their jobs, to the hospital, to schools, and obviously they can't pass down this road now. There's huge diversions, as I mentioned, and yeah, so it needs strengthening. They need a road that will serve the community well and be resilient despite adverse weather. And so that's what we're doing in one of the projects we're doing in Grenada, to make sure that people are able to move from place to place, and earn money, access hospitals, go to school, etc. In Montserrat, which is this is the UK overseas territory. You'll see on the left-hand side, there's a small jetty in this bay, which is called Little Bay. Now that jetty was built 25 years ago, over 25 years ago actually, after a devastating volcanic eruption, which some of you may have heard of or may have studied in geography like I did when I was at school, of Soufriere Hills volcano. And the military came in, they built this temporary jetty, which, kudos, 25 years later, still doing okay, but it's not big enough, it's not good enough to get container ships in, it's not strong enough to, they have to close the port as soon as there's any kind of adverse weather. So to help Montserrat's economy, to help them get connected or better connections to the outside world, to improve trade, etc., we're building a new modern port that's resilient to climate change, withstand sea level rise, withstand or resilient to earthquakes, etc., which is a huge deal for Montserrat. They've been asking for this for a long time, so, as you can imagine. So it's a great thing for us to be able to move forward on. And you can see I've put this picture here on the right because this is a Twitter photo from the governor's office in Montserrat, where the military are doing some kind of cool beach landings, but who cares? There's the barge in the background doing geotechnical investigations, which I'm more interested in, because finally there's some work happening on the ground and things are moving forward. And you know, I'm within friends here with you engineers, so you'll appreciate that. This is in Belize, which is in Central America, but they are English speaking, and they affiliate as, you know, they see themselves as Caribbean, so they're included in our infrastructure fund. And they have their coastal region is very flat and low lying, so and they have hurricanes and really bad rains quite frequently. So there's this road, we're doing 2 roads in Belize. This one is called the Coastal Road, which floods so frequently and is in such bad repair that when you go and hire a car at Belize International Airport, they say you're not allowed there, you're not insured to travel down the coastal road. And I had great pride in telling them, well, in a couple of years, that won't be true, because we're building a much better road. And you can see the kind of thing we're doing here. So the old river crossing is to the right, and they call this the Old Irish Bridge. And I'm not sure whether that's because some great Irish people built that bridge, or I'm not sure the story behind it. But obviously now they're keeping that for heritage purposes, but it won't be open to vehicles anymore. See, we've raised the level because that bridge gets inundated very frequently. And we've raised the level, we've built a much stronger structure, and the level of this road actually has been raised pretty much the whole way, the whole route, just to make sure that it can stay open and it can serve communities even if there has been some rain. And I just wanted to, on this project, flag some of the environmental stuff that we do, because obviously environment is really, really important as well. And we never want to do, as engineers, we don't want to do environmental damage beyond, you know, what we have to do to get the infrastructure in place. So there's been huge studies done about wildlife crossings. Belize has incredible wildlife, huge cats, huge, like scary things, but beautiful. And they obviously need to cross the road safely. So there's huge kind of culverts that there's research has been done to show that they're happy to go through these size culverts. And obviously they double as kind of flood like drainage when it is flooding. So there's things like that we're doing on these projects too. This is the last one, I think. So this is St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the port in Kingstown. So the area that's shaded in kind of orange there is the cargo port, which is very old. It's crumbling. It's not really working. None of the cranes work. They really struggle to, you know, do anything really effectively or useful there. And so this is the second largest project that the country has ever undertaken. We're building a new modern kind of top of the range cargo port for this country that has huge economic ambitions for trade. And yeah, this is going to be a fantastic port. And they're very excited about it. We actually launched it just a few weeks ago, and I've got some photos to show you. But I just wanted to flag here again I referenced some of the social elements, but there was up at the kind of top end of this the orange thing, there was some informal settlements, some squatters basically on government land, and those people had set up home, they'd lived there for years actually, and so as part of the project we've worked with that community and those people, and they've been rehoused in a kind of purpose-built facilities so that they can continue to live together as a community, which was really important to them, but also, you know, continue to add and to society, and, you know, continue to have their livelihoods and their family life and everything, despite this big bit of infrastructure that's needed for the country. So that gives you a bit of an idea of the kinds of things we're doing around the outside of the concrete, as I crudely put it. And this is just a couple of weeks ago. We launched the project with the very charismatic Prime Minister there in the light coloured shirt. And these are always really great events because, you know, you see everybody very excited about these projects, and it's kind of probably one of the better things, apart from seeing projects completed, is probably one of the better things about the job that I do, as well as being driven around in a flag car. Now, this is the coolest thing that I didn't realise this job entailed, but being driven around in a car with a British flag with diplomatic plates is pretty cool. However, there are downsides. So this is the Prime Minister's Twitter feed where he's talking about the launch project that we had, and the eager-eyed of you might have spotted yours truly there in the back looking like she's asleep. Promise I wasn't asleep, but it looks like I was asleep, and this is now on his Twitter feed forever and ever. But yeah, and that's one of the downsides of the job. Okay, so I know I've rambled on for way too long. Surprisingly, my throat's done okay. I just wanted to end on, this all sounds great. It all sounds like a piece of cake? Is it? Well, obviously not. We all are engineers, and actually we all love a bit of a challenge, and nothing ever goes straightforward, runs smoothly or goes, well on our projects. There's always challenges, and that's actually what we're built for. That's what we love doing, is solving those problems. And there have been many on these 15 different projects, as you can imagine. We've outed many fires, overcome many mountains, and all of those similar phrases on this program. So a couple of examples of contractors walking off site at 90% completion and the ongoing legal battles. Category 5 hurricanes coming, and kind of, you've designed something, Category 5 hurricane wipes through, and you're like, oh, okay, we better start again then, because that design's not going to work anymore. We've been through fraudulent elections, where there's not a government in place that the UK is happy to deal with. That's difficult. Been through routine changes in government, which is again difficult, but because politics of, one party has gone, we're going to do this great project, and the other party comes, and the opposition have been criticising them because they're the opposition. Then the opposition becomes the government, and you go, oh no, are they going to want to start this project again, or are they going to suddenly support the project? That's happened in quite a few countries. As I've mentioned already, the global pandemic has impacted us all in our jobs for sure, but certainly on the UK Caribbean Infrastructure Fund, we've been hugely impacted. Increases in costs, the delays in supply chain, the site shutdowns, it's just been horrendous for the last 2 years. Of when supply chains hit and costs of things are already so expensive, because shipping, you have to ship everything. There's nothing really in the region. You have to buy everything in and ship it. And as I've mentioned, we struggle. The biggest struggle I think we face daily is with the capacity of the governments of these small island developing nations, or SIDS as we call them. They don't have a lot of people in their civil service to make decisions, in their project management units to make decisions, or to manage contracts well, or to report progress to us. They just don't have the bodies on the ground, because they're the size of the population's the size of Winchester, trying to run a whole country. Currently, the risks, the biggest risk we face is on cost escalations for contracts that aren't signed yet. Materials, we all know this, materials cost so much, shipping costs so much, everything costs so much at the moment. There's so much uncertainty in this space, in trying to build things, and it's really difficult, and there's a lot of rescoping and repackaging of works going on, which we're desperately trying to manage. But as I said, that's what makes it all interesting. So just to end, I think I just wanted to finish on a positive note as opposed to a difficult note. I do this job because I want to help the lives of these people in these countries, to help these countries prosper economically, to enable new income streams, employment opportunities, to increase trade, to help young people get to schools, old people to get to hospitals when they need it. And it's really, really fulfilling work. And I'm really proud that after my time working in the Caribbean, it will be different. It will be more resilient, it will be more prosperous, and the people will have more opportunities. And that's it, I think, for my presentation. So Chris, I don't know if you wanted to do the Q&A.
Yes, certainly. Let's dive into that. But yeah, firstly, just to say thank you very much, Harriette, for delivering that talk, despite having tonsillitis and everything, but that's, you know, it's really appreciated and fascinating. Yeah, really fascinating to see. Really interesting to see, you know, the wide variety of different projects that you described, and having to deal with those competing challenges, you know, which is probably the kind of thing that many of us on the call, I'm sure, certainly myself, don't need to think about rehousing or reskilling, you know, communities on the sites that we're looking at. So that's fascinating as well. Great. So yeah, let's move on to the Q&A session. I don't think there are any questions in the chat at the moment, but I am very much invite people to please come off mute. If you have a question for Harriette, please please come off mute and ask it now. I think I see a couple of hands up. Mia, if you'd like to ask your question, please. Thanks.
Hi, Harriette. Thanks so much for the talk. It's really insightful. My question related to, you spoke about the relationship between the CDB providing assurances to the UK that the funds are being spent and they're accounted for. I just want to know what happens if the project is delayed, or how does it work contractually with the private contractors? If things are being overspent, is there a risk of the fund having to be increased, or just wanted to understand just contractually how that works?
Chris, I don't know, do you want to take a couple of questions, or shall I respond one by one? What would be best?
Should we go through one by one, if that's okay?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, great question, and a really live one at the moment. So we've always said to countries, this grant funding, you know, we can't increase it. So any risks, you know, to cost increases or anything additional you want that goes above the budget we can provide will be on, you know, on your books, basically. And for most independent countries, that's fine. They can take out a loan, they can, and you know, the business case for that loan is very clear with these kinds of projects. They can add money from their own budgets and move things around. So generally that's okay. And they can also, you know, now that cost increases are happening left, right and centre, they can rescope and reduce the scope of things and go, okay, well, actually, we really would love that road to be that long, but we're not going to be able to afford it. So we're going to do it this long instead. And we'll do a second phase, you know, at some point in the future. So kind of contractually, the UK is, you know, we're not responsible for that kind of thing. We've offered this money as a gift, and you know, it's kind of for the country governments to be able to manage that themselves. The only exception to that obviously will be Montserrat. So Montserrat is a small community with a very small economy, and it's a UK overseas territory. So we essentially play a big part in, the UK still plays a big part in governing Montserrat, although they do have their own elected government. But they rely on about 70% of their country budget is from the UK, is aid money from the UK for them to be able to just operate. So we've seen cost increases on those projects, and we have had to increase the budget. We could only do it for that country because we are the only people that can do it. We won't let them borrow money. They don't have any spare money in their budget. We know that. So we have had to increase the budget, increase the fund, but solely for that project. So that's a bit of a kind of niche example, but hopefully that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Harriette.
Thank you. I think we have a question from Famaz Ali. Would you be able to come off mute and ask your question? Thanks.
Am I audible?
You're very quiet, but I think we can just about hear you. If you could ask.
No.
Yeah. So, being a structural engineer, how can I venture into infrastructure development advisory? What would be your recommendation? Should I get chartered first, or is a PhD compulsory? As I am quite motivated towards this side of field, As these days I'm working with a professor at Stanford on development of seismic fragility functions for supporting risk assessment at national level.
So yeah, it sounds like you're already doing great stuff towards kind of moving in that direction.
Yeah.
You need to work out what area of the international development problem you might want to work in. You might not know that yet. I'm still not sure if I know it yet, but and that's why I'm kind of going around. But you know, there are different places you can work. You can work as a donor, and you can kind of set the scene of where we think UK money should be spent. It's a little bit less technical, but you kind of set the agenda, which is a different thing that you can do. And having great infrastructure, great engineering minds at this level really helps us do that well. You could work at an implementing partner, so someone like a development bank or a company that provides, you know, that will implement programs like this. So companies that might design the projects that I'm funding, or a company that might build the projects that are being funded. All of those people need engineers at every single level, and so you need to work out kind of where you see yourself or where you think your skills best fit, and start to kind of work your way into that field, or into those companies that do those kinds of projects, and then into those teams. It's not very easy. There's not, you know, it is hard. There are a lot of people that want to do it. It's very competitive, but it doesn't mean that you can't do it at all. Of course you can. So you just, you know, you don't have to have a PhD. You don't have to have, you know, X, Y, or Z qualification. Experience internationally is very important. Obviously, there's huge differences between the way the UK kind of infrastructure space works and the rest of the world, but it's not difficult to learn that, but you do need experience doing that. But yeah, I'd just say, you know, try and learn more about the system, try and learn more about how these kinds of programs work, try and get experience abroad if you can, and yeah, just keep going.
Yeah. Thank you for such a comprehensive response. And one more thing, can I contact you? Is there any email address where I can ask you questions if I find any in future?
Yes, I didn't actually put my email address on here, so sorry about that, but I'll I don't know, Chris, how I do that. I can put it in the chat. How about that? And then you can feel free to email me with any, and that goes to anyone. I'm happy to take questions. That might take a while to respond because my inbox is insane, but please feel free to contact me.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Harriette. There's a question from Peter Phipps.
Hi, Harriette. How are you doing?
I'm good, Peter. How are you?
Yeah, good. I'm just going to drop the hand. So
please introduce yourself and where you sit in this problem.
Okay, so I'm Peter Phipps. I'm actually the Caribbean regional representative for Mott MacDonald, and it's a consultancy services provider, and we've actually been involved in, I think, 4 or 5 of the projects that have been running under the SIF program that Harriette's outlined. So yeah, I mean, it's been a really good experience, and there's some really great positives, and it's good to see some of the infrastructure, you know, climate resilient infrastructure coming through now. And obviously there have been a few challenges, and Harriette highlighted those. Particularly the hurricane she mentioned was actually on the project that we were working on in Dominica, which went through Hurricane Maria in 2017, that caused quite a bit of disruption. So yeah, I just had a couple of questions, Harriette, just quickly. I think firstly was, from FCDO UK government perspective, do you feel that the value of the investment has actually been returned? Do you think that that's actually been a positive thing? I mean, you spoke about many positive aspects, but in terms of the, you know, the investment side of it, and also really interested whether or not there may be a second phase of SIF type activity, particularly considering the way that the UK government is looking to very much enhance its engagement in the, you know, Caribbean region, because I think that'd be something that of great interest to myself and other people on the call about other similar sort of opportunities that might evolve. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. I was worried about you grilling me in front of everyone, but yeah, more than happy to answer those questions. So the value being returned is obviously a really difficult question to answer, not only anyway once all the projects are completed, because it's not all quantitative, there's a lot of qualitative stuff going on as well. But you know, halfway through these projects without having seen where they end up, it's kind of even more difficult to answer. I think and there's a couple of things to kind of mention. There's obviously, I mentioned the evaluation. Now the evaluation will look at kind of what our goals were when we set out and have we achieved those. That's a really important question that it's answering, and I look forward to that report, which will obviously come at the end of the programme, but that will give you a kind of independent view on whether it was worth it or not. I think it's seen internally as a great, not only a game changer in the Caribbean. So, you know, the MDBs or the CDB in this region have calculated that the infrastructure investment gap is a certain amount of money, and UK CIF responds to 10% of that gap. So there is this huge contribution that we are making to the region. So I feel like we should be able to make a step change in resilience and infrastructure provision around the region. But, you know, you having worked in this region will know that there's so much more that needs to be done. So it's hard to know. And as we see, you know, the really difficult pandemic for the whole globe, but, you know, countries like these that are tiny rely on tourism. Their economies have been absolutely battered. And now the costs of building these projects have escalated. Some, you know, some bids are coming back, you know, double of, you know, easily double of what, you know, consultants thought they should be. And that's really difficult because that really impacts on the value for money, the value for the UK money that we're spending, because we thought we were going to buy a road that's 20 kilometres, but actually we can only afford a road that's 10 kilometres. That's really difficult to stomach, but you have to just sit and say, well, you know, there's nothing I can do about it, but also 10 kilometres better than nothing. But that's a really interesting kind of question. You know, it feels like the value for money is decreasing because of the, you know, external context, the global environment. And on the second, and just to kind of, I think, finish that question off, the UK CIF is seen, you know, in the region, I think, as a really powerful demonstration of the UK's support for the Caribbean. It's by far the biggest programme that we have in this region, and it overshadows a lot of kind of infrastructure programmes that we have elsewhere in the world as well. So Caribbean leaders and Caribbean countries feel very they you know, from a diplomacy aspect and the way that this UK is perceived, I think it's been a really valuable tool. And now that's not why I do this job. I don't do it so the UK looks great. Other people have that job, but I do it for trying to serve the people that need this. But I think, you know, the UK will probably reflect on this and see, you know, strengthen diplomatic ties, strengthen relationships with countries, which is important for a lot of reasons. For both countries, both sides of that relationship. On the second phase, I mean, it's a great question, and it's not one that we need to answer now, is my answer, because we need to get further through these projects. We need to get some of them completed. We need to start showing the value that we've achieved so that we can then make a great case for a second phase. It's certainly needed, but, you know, there are so many other needs around the world for UK aid funding. But it's not something we're thinking about now. Right now, we're still focusing on trying to keep these projects moving, particularly out the kind of end of the pandemic. But it is one we will ask, you know, in a year or two's time. Yes.
Well, thank you, Harriette, for answering those questions there. I think we've reached the end of the hour session that we had, and I'm conscious of the fact that there's still some questions in the chat and there's still some hands up. So I suppose, Harriette, it's up to you, but would you be happy sort of taking some questions via the email that you shared?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I've got another 10 minutes or so now, or I'm happy to respond by email if people want to email through questions. That's fine.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you. I think maybe what we'll do is I'll sort of just wrap up quickly if that's okay. But then actually then after that, if you're happy to continue staying on the call and if others who have questions are happy to continue staying on as well, then you know, for the next 10 minutes or so, then maybe you could do those as well if that's okay.
Sounds great.
Perfect. Thank you. Brilliant. So there's just one thing I wanted to mention at the end there before we finish. So let's see, just share my screen quickly. Perfect. So just wanted to mention before we wrap up, so the SecEd Young Members Subcommittee, in collaboration with the ICE Bristol City Club and ICE GSA Southwest Committee, are jointly organising a site visit to the Soil Foundation Structure Interaction Lab at the Langford campus of the University of Bristol. So this is a state-of-the-art facility designed to enable research into the structural geotechnical boundary. So it looks like a really interesting event coming up on the 12th of September. I should mention that the event is currently fully booked, but please do get in contact via the email on the screen here if you are interested, in case there are any cancellations or any last minute spaces become available. We will add you to the waiting list. Great. So thank you very much again to our speaker, Dr. Harriette Stone, for giving us a wonderful presentation today, despite all of the setbacks that she mentioned, and also staying on for a little bit longer to answer any additional questions. But that's brilliant. I think so formally we'll bring the session to a close now, and I'll wish everyone a great rest of the day, but please stay on if you have any extra questions. Perfect. Thank you very much. And I'll stop sharing, Harriet, and hand back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, I think there's just one person with their hand up. So I don't know, Rachel, if you wanted to jump in.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So I work for
Oh, you're very quiet. I'm sorry, I can't hear you very well.
better?
That's a bit better. Yeah, go
Great.
for it.
So I work for an engineering consultancy doing playground drainage mostly, and we have a structural team as well. How would we go about getting involved in some of these projects? Appreciate a lot of these are probably too far down the line, but if there are any current opportunities or opportunities coming up, or sort of these types of funded projects in the future, how would we find them and tender applications in, etc.?
Really good question, and something obviously is really important. We love that Mott MacDonald, for example, is involved in the projects. We love UK expertise being brought to the Caribbean. So on this programme, all the procurement that it happens for the infrastructure works or for the design works is posted on this Caribbean Development Bank website. So even though it's government's procuring, the CDB will publish those notices. So my advice would be to keep an eye on those notices and jump on any opportunities that you can. There is a Department for International Trade team that can support anything around that if you wanted to get in touch with them. If you email me, then I can pass you their details and they can facilitate anything that they can from their side. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, really helpful. Thank you so much. I'll send you an email.
Good, no problem. Are there any other questions, or should we wrap it up there? I think there are a couple in the chat which I might just respond to offline, unless those people want to speak up. If not, okay, well, there we go. Let's wrap it up. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Harriet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harriet.
Take care.
Thank you.